Hello BookTube, me again, still wearing a lot of coffee, but nonetheless I smell delicious. So although I haven't been making a ton of videos, I have still been reading, which is great. So I've got quite a few books to talk about at the moment, because if I wait much longer I am probably going to start forgetting things. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is The Island of the Blue Dolphin by Scott O'Dell. I read this book when I was 9. So that was 31 years ago. I know that I was 9 because I can remember the teacher who was teaching at the time. We didn't read it in class, I read it for fun. And I had good taste as a kid. Now, I saw this one last year at my favourite bookshop, and I couldn't help but buy it because I had this memory. I couldn't remember the whole story. I mean, 31 years is a long time ago, and for somebody who reads about 100 books a year, that's quite a few thousand books ago. And but yeah, I have this vivid memory, well, this vivid picture in my mind of a Native American girl sitting on a bit of a cliff looking out at the ocean. I remember she was alone. So I wanted to reread the story to see what I thought of it now. And I must admit, I had good taste as a child. The story is set in the 1800s, and it's about a girl, her name is Corona, or however you would say that, who was stuck on this island for 18 years on her own. In the story it explains how she is separated from her people, and that is believable, compelling, heartbreaking, pretty much everything. You have, well, it's heartbreaking, but this isn't one of those stories where the heartache, you have your nose rubbed in as a reader. It deals with it, you move on, and I like that because there is so much that time, well, let's say so much time that this tiny little book covers. You have loss, you have success, all these different types of feelings going through this. But as a whole, it is just a wonderful survival story of this, well, she starts off as a girl, a teenager, on this island on her own, surviving. And it is touching, it is moving, it is interesting, it is not boring. But it is also loosely based on a true story. This woman's name was apparently Juana Maria, and she was otherwise known as the Lone Woman of San Nicolas. Her story, however, is not as nice as Corona's because by the sounds of it, she survived 5 days on land after being rescued. So I'm not too sure if they interviewed her and got information before, or whether, you know, maybe on the trip to America, or whether she was somewhere else and then died 5 days after a move or something. But as a whole, forgetting the history, the story was pretty good. It's a nice survival story, and there are things in it that I think adults would pick up that I wouldn't have picked up as a child. So I quite enjoyed revisiting that one. Then I did My Grandmother Sends Her Regards and Apologies by Fredrik Backman, otherwise known as the author of A Man Called Ove or Uva, or however you would like to say that. And I will say that this man writes with a lot of charm. Now in this story we have a young girl, in fact that was the problem, she was either 7 or 9, I think 9, who had an extremely close relationship with her rather wacky grandmother. And her grandmother, sorry for a slight spoiler, it happens early on, passes away. And she sends this little girl on a quest to go and deliver letters to people. And this grandmother, okay, first of all, the little girl has been bullied quite badly at school. You learn that quite early. And her grandmother understands, and she has created a fairy tale world for this girl, something a bit like their own Neverland. And as the story progresses, so you start realizing that the fairy tale is not as much of a fairy tale as one thinks. It might be put in a land where there are dragons and monsters and things like that. But our world is full of dragons and monsters, and it's her interpretation of real people stories. The characters in the story are very well done, but I did have mixed feelings about this. The little girl was far too clever for her age, and that is always a problem for me. I mean, I teach teenagers for a living. I know what a teenager is capable of doing. Don't give me a 9-year-old who would outstrip them. I am aware of the fact that there are exceptions to the rule, but a lot of books seem to make me seem to be wanting me to believe that there are many exceptions to the rule, and that is a bit contradictory. So I didn't quite go for that side of it, but I did like her relationship with her grandmother, and I thought, you know, for a story that was just sweet, it was sweet. The next book I read, actually these are in no particular order whatsoever, is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Sanders. I don't know if there's anything that I can say about this book that has not been said in the last 2 years on BookTube. In case you have managed to miss every video out there, welcome to BookTube, by the way. This story is about Abraham Lincoln and his son, although that might also be a bit of a stretch, because apparently in history Abraham Lincoln went to the tomb where his son Willie, he was only 12 when he died, was laid to rest, and he actually hugged his son's body. And this story is based on that idea and then is told via ghosts in the graveyard. I really found the story between Abraham Lincoln and Willie very touching, but considering the title of this book, I didn't find that as present as I would have liked. It was a bit not quite there as much. The other ghosts formed so much more of the story, and I wasn't as interested in what they had to do. I found their introductions very interesting, but after that they kind of lost my interest, and then it just became a bit ridiculous in my opinion, as they're trying to save Willie from not moving on to the afterlife. The style for the story is also, I'm undecided. It's written as though it is a collection of blurbs or quotes from people. So you'll have the passage, and then underneath it you'll have the name of the person who spoke it or told it to you. And for most parts it was alright, especially for the shorter pieces. But for the longer ones where you actually needed to turn the page to see who was telling you this, I found a lot of unnecessary eye and handwork. While it didn't read like a play, I think for convenience it would have been better if it had been structured something like a play. There are parts of it that I like though. I like the fact that you had some people telling me what other people said and did. That part I liked. I liked the fact that there were contradictions throughout. Describing something as bland, let's say as a dress for example. One person will say it's red, the next one will say it was green, the other one will say she was wearing trousers. You know, it was that kind of a contradiction. And I did enjoy that as well. I thought that was rather humorous. But as a whole, I enjoyed the reading experience of it. I was captivated, I was curious, I wanted to know what was going on, I was turning pages. But afterwards I felt a bit let down. I was expecting something I think that was a lot bigger, a lot greater, a lot more Lincoln, and a lot less silly ghosts, because, you know, I don't believe in ghosts, so it didn't really make me connect with much. Yeah, there was something else I was going to say about it. What was it? This is why making notes is a good idea. I can't think of what else I was going to say about it. So let's move on. We get to my first DNF of the year. Bridget Jones, The Edge of Reason. I didn't get very far. I gave up very early in this. It's a bunch of stupid people being stupid in an attempt to make me laugh at them. I don't laugh at stupidity, I eye roll at stupidity. And this was just making me eye roll to the point that I was getting a headache. And I decided, you know what? It's not worth my trouble. Maybe I remember enjoying the first one. Granted, it was over 20 years ago, perhaps, that I read the first one. I thought it was great. But I find it a bit of an insult that I am supposed to, as a single woman in her 40s who has no significant other or non-furry children, that I'm supposed to identify with the stupidity and relate and connect. It didn't work for me. I don't find stupidity funny. I find stupidity stupid. And moving on. So then the next book, I read these pretty much together. When Steve Donoghue had a read-along of Homer's The Iliad this month. Still, well, it will be next month by the time I post this, because it will be tomorrow. So I thoroughly, I'd been putting off reading the Iliad for a very long time, and his read-along gave me the motivation to finally pick it up and get moving with it. And I'm glad I used both copies. It was a bit disorientating because this one refers to Aries and that one refers to Mars. But hey, I did Percy Jackson. I know who these people are. I'm being very flippant there. But this one is the translation by Evie Rue, and it is a very modern day prose translation. In fact, I think there's a lot of cliches in here which I found a bit strange, a bit jarring and out of place. And then this one is a prose version which is a little heavy to get through in places. I think it made reading it with the other one made this one so much easier to go through as well, because I liked being able to see the prose version, the verse version, because this one is in verse. As to the story of the Iliad, that short clip of that Trojan War, I must admit I learned quite a lot. I have read books in the past where Paris and Helen were supposed to have been an older version of a Romeo and Juliet story, which they were not. Helen, I do not think, was all that impressed with Paris one way or another. He pretty much came and stole her from her. Actually, not pretty much, he did. He stole her from her husband, who was a Greek, and I can understand why he would want to come and blow him to bits and pieces. The gods are rather fickle, unlike the heroes and the intelligent beings that they are put across as being in other stories that I have read. Percy Jackson. Hang on, I'm going to sneeze. So yes, the gods are a lot more fickle. Achilles, I was also under the impression, was a lot more substantial, more manly, more, I don't know, but he had a temper tantrum, and then he had another temper tantrum, and then he was disrespectful, and then he killed the guy that I really liked, and then he was really disrespectful, and then he had a change of heart, a mood swing. And yeah, I have decided now that I no longer have Achilles tendons, I have Hector tendons. Because Hector, I really liked Hector. How he didn't go and feed his little brother off to the Greeks, I don't know, because I would have been very tempted. Paris was horribly annoying. Whereas Hector was wise, and he was strong, and he was self-sacrificing, and yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed Hector, and I do agree with Steve Donoghue in his video. You must take a look if you haven't seen it, if you're interested, in the Iliad, where he spoke about Hector running around Troy when he realizes that he's alone and Achilles is after him, and it being out of character, and I think it was. But I think it also kind of makes one realize that Hector didn't really want to die. As self-sacrificing as he wasn't exactly going to be suicidal either. So, I really enjoyed it. Well, no, it was a bit of a stretch. I mean, let's face it, there's only so many ways that you can kill somebody with a spear, so a lot of it reads repetitively, especially when you're trying to read it twice. And there's a hell of a lot of bloodshed. Good Lord, this was a war that was described in tiny, tiny, minuscule detail. And I did start to skim places where they started giving a detailed history of every single soldier who died. But I'm glad that I read it. I feel like I learned a lot. Moving on, next book. All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. Now this one won the Pulitzer 2015, that's what I'm thinking. Can't remember now. Oh, it says there, Pulitzer 2015, yes. And I actually really enjoyed this. I'd been putting this one off. It's been on my TBR pile for ages. And first of all, I thought this was going to be so sickly sweet, because I'd heard people talk about it on BookTube before the days that I found the adult booktubers, and I really was under the impression that this was going to be some really warped love story, and I was not sure how it would have won the Pulitzer either. So you have a blind French girl by the name of Marie Laure, and you have a young German boy by the name of Werner Fenning, and he's an orphan. He and his sister were orphaned. Their father was killed in a coal mine accident, and they ended up in this home for children. And Werner was an exceptionally gifted young boy, especially with electronics, radios, things like that. But because he was an orphan, there was no question. He was going to become a coal miner at the age of 15. That was going to be his life. Until he fixes a radio for a Nazi and ends up going to the Hitler youth camp, or youth academy. And the story is really showing that there are more than one side. There's more than one perspective. And that, you know, good people sometimes make bad decisions for good reasons. Because I don't know what I would have done if I was given the alternative of being a coal miner or joining an army in a war that you don't know how long is going to last or what the consequences are. I really actually find myself enjoying this. I like the fact that it ends and you don't know everything, because that is more realistic for a lot of people in war situations. I liked a lot of this, really, actually. I loved the relationship between the blind girl and her father. I loved the way she described things. There's a scene quite early on where she says that although she can't see, she imagines in colour. And the way she described her father, you know, how he was blue here and this colour there, but he was red in the kitchen. And you didn't need to get told that, you know, Dad obviously found cooking stressful and things like that. I really enjoyed that part. I loved the language in this. It really appealed to me. And then the last book that I read is Orphan X by Gregg Hurwitz. And if I remember, I'm going to put it up there. If I forget, I'm catching something, okay? And this was a book that was lent to me by my favourite ever bookseller, Kerry at Bargain Books. And this was a great palate cleanser, because after all the light we cannot see, I needed something that would be a change. And this story is kind of a bit of a typical thriller. You have your assassin trained by the government in an almost illegal, actually it would be illegal, I believe. They have human rights laws against stuff like this, but he was trained as an orphan, well, as a child, on how to be an assassin, and he's gone rogue, which basically means he's got a conscience. I actually enjoyed this. If I compare it, let's say, to the Jack Reacher books, this one is less explicit in the violence. So you are aware that there is violence that is happening, but so many thrillers go into all the gore and the guts, like the Iliad, all the gore and the guts, whereas this one didn't. I didn't feel that the violence was gratuitous. And the other thing that I appreciated was that the violence against women was not of a sexual nature. I'm tired of reading rape in thrillers because, you know, it's not there that it adds to the plot or something. It's not something that's going to be dealt with. It's just, you know, let's go rape the woman. And I'm glad that stuff like that didn't happen, that it was just general violence. And I actually liked the hero. He was a nice guy. He had a good conscience. And as I said, it was a softer story than those like Jack Reacher and things like that, and like Bourne, and yeah. So it was a nice, fun, light read. I did it in just over a day. And if I didn't have a 2-hour work meeting during my holiday, I would have been done in a day. But yeah, life and responsibilities, you know. Well, that is the books that I read since my last video, I think. I think that's all of them. I am currently reading Bouch Through My Eyes, which I'm really enjoying. My mom and I have been doing it together, actually. So I read parts and she reads parts, and it's a nice bonding experience. We usually do this with fantasy. We've never done it with non-fiction before, but hey, it's the first for everything. And I picked up the Poisonwood Bible last night, which my camera is currently sitting on because it was a nice fat book. So I'm not showing that one. And I'm not so sure what I'm making of the Poisonwood Bible. There seems to be a lot of Bible stuff, which, yeah, does not quite appeal to my senses. But I can see that there are elements of it that I'm going to enjoy. I like the fact that I can already tell that the narrators are going to be unreliable, and that it's going to be fun trying to work out what the truth is if I can. And yeah, other than that, I'm hoping to pick up some Patrick Rothfuss and maybe all the other books that I need to read that are on here. That would be nice. Anyway, until my next video, which I will only be filming tomorrow, I'm going to go before I sneeze again. Bye for now.